She had a key because of the plants. That is where it started, practically speaking. 3 months before the night I came home to find her sitting on my kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, and her knees pulled up, and her face doing the thing faces do when someone has been crying for a while, and has just stopped because they heard the door. I had given her the key in October when I flew to Phoenix for a conference, and I had a fig tree that needed water every 4 days. She had given it back when I returned. I had said keep it, and she had, and I had not thought about it again until I turned the knob on a Thursday evening in January and found her there. I stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked up. "Hi," she said. The voice of someone who had not been expecting to have to use it quite yet. "Hi," I said. I set my bag down. I took off my coat. I hung it on the hook beside the door that I had installed specifically because I was the kind of person who needed coats to go on hooks or they would end up on chairs, and coats on chairs made me anxious in a way I had stopped trying to explain. I did these things in order, because doing them in order gave her a moment and gave me one too. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor across from her, not beside her, across, close enough that this was intentional, far enough that it gave her space to explain or not explain, as she needed. She looked at me for a moment. "I just needed to know you were real," she said. "My name is Thomas Ellery." I was 34, a social worker for a family services nonprofit in a mid-sized city in Ohio, which means I spent most of my professional life sitting across from people in the worst moments of their year and trying to be present in a way that helped rather than performed. I was reasonably good at it. I had been told I had a quality of stillness that made people feel like the room was safer than it had been when they walked in. I did not know how to explain where this came from, except that it was the same quality that made me the person people called when something happened. Not the first call, usually, but the reliable second one, the call you made after the immediate emergency and before you had to figure out what came next. Her name was Renata Flores. She was a graphic designer, 32, my neighbor for 2 years in the apartment 4 doors down, and my friend. I want to be careful about the word, because it was accurate, and it was also the most compressed version of a more complicated thing. She was the person I ran into at the mailboxes and stayed talking to for 40 minutes in the hallway without noticing the time. She was the person who knocked on my door on Sunday mornings with the extra half of whatever she had made, because she always made too much and had figured out I was a person who forgot to eat on weekends. She was the person whose laugh I could identify from across a loud room, not because I was listening for it, or not only, but because it had a specific quality that I had cataloged without meaning to. I had been in love with her for, I would estimate, 14 months. I had not said so. The reasons for this were the reasons they always are: the risk of the friendship, the uncertainty about what she felt, the particular arithmetic of a person who has learned to be so dependable that he has stopped asking for anything in return for it. Let me be more specific about this, because it matters to what came later. I had grown up as the eldest of 4, which meant I had learned early that being the one who kept things steady was both a role and a contribution, and that people who fill that role tend to receive a specific kind of appreciation, genuine, warm, and fundamentally not about them. They are thanked for what they hold. They are not always asked what they need to put down. I had carried this into adulthood with me the way you carry habits that were once adaptations, not because the original need was still present, but because the pattern had become the person. I was steady. I was there. I was real in all the practical ways. I had the key behind the key. I was the second call. I was the one who knew where the paperwork was and how to talk to the insurance company and which questions to ask. I was good at this. I did not resent it. But I had confused being relied on with being known, and they are not the same thing, and the gap between them had grown, over the years, into something I had stopped trying to measure. I want to tell you what I knew about Renata Flores before that Thursday. I knew she had grown up in Tucson and had come to Ohio for a job, and had stayed past the job because the city had gotten into her before she noticed it happening, which was something I understood, because the same thing had happened to me. I knew she had a sister in Phoenix named Lucia who called every Sunday at noon and with whom she had the specific relationship of two people who are very different from each other and have decided to love each other well anyway. I knew she was the kind of designer who cared about the thing underneath the thing, not just how something looked, but what it was saying, whether it was saying the right thing, whether the form was honest about the content. She brought this quality to everything, including conversations, which meant that talking to her in the hallway for 40 minutes was different from talking to most people for twice that long. I knew she had been in a relationship for the 2 years before I moved into the building. Not from her telling me directly, but from the way she talked around it. The past tense that had crept into certain kinds of sentences. The spare weekend afternoons that had appeared in her schedule in the spring, and which she had started filling with long walks and pottery class, and the occasional Sunday morning of making too much food and bringing half of it to me. The man's name was Daniel. I knew this because she had said it once, in the context of explaining something about why she had taken the pottery class. It had been a thing she'd always meant to do, and hadn't while she was with Daniel, a sentence that told me more about the relationship than the name did. I had not asked more, she had not offered more. I had held the information the way I held most things about her, carefully, without pressure, making room. What I did not know, until the kitchen floor, was that she had been doing something similar with me. The drive home on Thursday had been ordinary. Work had been the kind of day that runs long not because of emergency but because the nature of the work expands to fill whatever space you give it, and I had given it too much. I had thought about what I was going to eat. I had thought about the case notes I needed to finish by morning. I had thought somewhere in the last 3 blocks about whether Renata had mentioned having plans. She had said something on Tuesday about a gallery opening a friend was in, but that was Tuesday, and today was Thursday, and I had not been tracking her schedule with any more organization than the loose awareness that comes from living 4 doors down. I had not thought, she will be on my kitchen floor when I open the door. She was sitting with her back against the cabinet and her knees pulled up and her hands loose in her lap, and she had clearly been crying in the sustained way rather than the sharp way, the kind that comes not from a single moment but from something that had been accumulating for a while and had finally found its time. Her eyes were dry when I came in. She had the particular look of someone who has just finished something exhausting. I sat down across from her on the kitchen floor without being asked to, because it was the right place to be and I knew it. She said what she said. I held it for a moment. The way I held things that needed holding, not rushing toward them, not filling the space with response before I understood the shape of what had been given. Tell me, I said. Not tell me what's wrong, or tell me what happened. Just tell me. She looked at her hands for a moment, then at me. I was having a very bad day, she said. Not an emergency. Just the kind of day where everything is fine on paper, and nothing feels fine in practice, and you go through it doing the right things, and by the end of it you are very tired of doing the right things. She paused. And I was on the way home and I kept thinking. She stopped. What? I said. I kept thinking about you, she said, evenly, like a woman stating something she had decided to state accurately. Not about calling you, not about talking. I needed to be somewhere you were. And then I thought you weren't home yet, and the key was in my bag, and she looked at the floor. I sat down. I don't know why on the floor. The floor is good, I said. She looked at me. Something came through her expression that she was not trying to control. I know, she said. That's what I mean. There it was. Not the words themselves. The fact that she knew what I meant when I said the floor was good. That the floor specifically was something we had in common, which I had not known until she confirmed it, which meant she had been noticing things about me the way I had been noticing things about her, which meant the space between us was not what I had estimated it to be. Not because she said something extraordinary, because she said I know in the way you say it when you are not explaining, when you are confirming. I looked at her on the kitchen floor in the January light. The lamp in the corner was on, the window dark behind it, the room doing what rooms do when they are warm inside and cold outside, which is to feel like the specific inside of something worth being in. Renata, I said. I know this is strange, she said. Coming here without... It's not strange, I said. She looked at me. You have a key, I said. You can use it. I don't mean the key, she said. I know, I said. I don't mean the key either. She was quiet for a moment. The apartment was quiet around us. Down the hall, the radiator did what the radiator did at this hour, its particular irregular knock, which I had stopped noticing 8 months ago, and which she apparently knew well enough to not look toward when it started. How long have you had a key to somewhere I felt like being, she said. The question was careful, constructed. She was a person who constructed things with attention to whether the form was honest about the content, and she had built this question to mean exactly what it meant without requiring me to confirm anything she hadn't already offered. About 14 months, I said. She absorbed this. Slowly, the way she absorbed things that mattered. I've been thinking about you for 11, she said. In the way you mean. Not I like you or I have feelings for you. In the way you mean. As though we had already established the vocabulary and she was using it. I looked at her across the kitchen floor. You're 3 months ahead, she said. I was waiting, I said. For what? I thought about that. The honest answer required some precision, and precision was what the moment deserved. For something like this, I said. Not this specifically, I didn't know it would be this. But something that told me the calculation was right. I looked at her. I've been wrong about the calculation before. I'm careful with it now. She looked at me for a long moment, like a woman who has just received an accurate description of something she already understood but had not heard said in words. You're a social worker, she said. You sit across from people in the worst moments and stay. Yes, I said. That's not what you're doing now, she said. No, I said. It's not. She leaned her head back against the cabinet, looked at the ceiling, then at me. Thomas, she said. Yeah. I'm going to stop being embarrassed about the floor, she said. And about coming here. Good, I said. You shouldn't be. And I'm going to ask you something. Okay, I said. She looked at me with the full attention she brought to things she had decided were important enough for the full attention. Have you eaten? She said. I looked at her. The corner of her mouth moved. Because I made too much again, she said. It's in my apartment. And I think we should probably not have this conversation on a kitchen floor if we can avoid it. We ate at her kitchen table. She had made a soup, the kind with white beans and kale and something smoky in the broth that I had not expected, and which was, as most things she made were, better than it had any obligation to be. The table had her work on it, pushed to one side, a project she was in the middle of, a branding system for a small architecture firm. The color studies spread in a way that meant she had been living with the problem and wanted it visible. I glanced at it. She saw me glance. The blue isn't right, she said before I asked. The one on the left? Both of them, she said, but the one on the left more. Too cold, I said. She pointed her spoon at me. Exactly too cold. She looked at the studies. The firm is warm. The partners are warm. The work is precise, but the people are warm, and the blue is saying the wrong thing about them. She shook her head. I'll fix it tomorrow. That was her. That was the specific quality of her. She cared about what things were saying, and whether what they were saying was true. She applied it to design, and she applied it to people, and she applied it to the broth in the soup, which she had adjusted 3 times before deciding it was right. We talked for 3 hours, not always about the thing on the floor, but with the floor underneath all of it, in the way that a foundation is underneath everything built on it. I told her about the calculation, not in the language of a social worker, just in the language of a man who had been paying attention for 14 months and had been waiting for the right evidence. She told me about the day. Not the whole of it, but the part that mattered. She had been in a client meeting that had gone sideways in a way that reminded her, with uncomfortable precision, of the last 6 months with Daniel. The specific experience of being in a room where the thing she made was being used without being understood, of saying something true and having it land like it wasn't. She had left the meeting and gotten on the train and sat with it for 45 minutes, and by the time she was off the train she had understood, with the clarity that sometimes comes from being tired enough to stop arguing with yourself, that what she needed was not comfort in the general sense, it was specific. I kept thinking about your face, she said. Which sounds, it doesn't, I said. She looked at me. How do you always know what I'm about to say it sounds like? Because I've been listening for a while, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I know. She said it in the same way she'd said it on the kitchen floor, not explaining. Confirming, I've noticed you listening. Since when? I said. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to questions that deserved it. The 2nd month, she said. When you asked about Lucia, you asked a follow-up question about something I had mentioned 3 weeks earlier that I assumed you'd forgotten. I don't forget things you say, I said. I know, she said, softer now. That's when I started noticing. I want to tell you something about being the steady one. About being the person people call when the first emergency is over. Not because I am resentful of this. I am not. It is part of who I am in a way I value. But there is a specific loneliness in being reliable that is hard to name from the inside, which is this. People trust you with the things they need carrying. They do not always think to wonder what you are carrying yourself. Renata noticed what I was carrying. Not because I showed her, I had not shown her. I had been as careful with my own interior as I was with everyone else's. She noticed because she paid the kind of attention that does not require the thing to be presented. She was a designer. She understood what something was saying even when it was trying to be quiet. She had noticed me being quiet. She had come to my apartment on a Thursday in January, not only because she needed to be somewhere real, but because she had been thinking about the fact that I was real in a specific way. Not reliable, not steady, not the person who had the key and the plant and the good floor. Real in the way that you think about a person when you have started to understand that you want to know more of them than you currently know. That is not a thing you say to someone you have casual feelings about. I had known this the moment she said it. I had known it on the kitchen floor with the coat on the hook and the lamp in the corner and the radiator doing its thing and her looking up at me with the face of someone who had been crying and had stopped because they heard the door. Not because she said something extraordinary, because she came. 6 months later, we were at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, the kind of June Saturday that makes Ohio feel like a different country than Ohio in January. Light at a different angle, the air with its particular early summer combination of cut grass and coffee, and something baking somewhere close. She was looking at a stall of ceramic bowls the way she looked at things she was thinking about, with the full attention, the unhurried considering of someone who takes the quality of a thing seriously and does not pretend otherwise. I was holding the bag with the bread and the peaches and the coffee we had stopped for on the way, which was from the place 3 blocks from her apartment that she had introduced me to in February, and which I now could not imagine being in the neighborhood without stopping at. Small accumulations. That was how the months had gone, not in large events but in small ones, each of which was unremarkable on its own and which together had added up to a different life than the one I had been living before a Thursday in January. She picked up a small bowl, turned it over, set it down. "The glaze is uneven," she said, "but that's the interesting part. Not despite it," I said. "Because of it." She looked at me sideways, the look she gave me when I had said the thing she was thinking in a different form. "You do that constantly," she said. "Do what?" "Finish the sentence." No. She picked up the bowl again, without making it feel finished. She bought the bowl. It sits on the shelf in what is now our kitchen, her apartment, into which I moved in the fall, quietly and without ceremony, the way most right things happen. The glaze is uneven on the left side. That is the interesting part. I was holding the bag with the peaches at the farmer's market, and she had turned from the bowl stall to face me, and the June light was doing what good light does, making everything more itself, and I said, "Renata, I'm going to say something." She set the bowl down. She turned to face me fully. She gave me the full attention, the kind that had once made me feel, standing across a hallway or at a mailbox, like the room was safer, the kind I now understood she gave to things she had already decided were worth it. Not because I was the steady one this time, because she was. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "I know you do," I said. "I'm going to say it anyway." She looked at me the way she had looked at me on the kitchen floor, past the surface of the thing, at the thing itself, at whether the form was honest about the content. It was. She knew it was. "Say it," she said. I did. Have you ever had someone come looking for you, not for what you could do for them, but for you specifically, because you were the real thing they needed to get back to? And did you know, when they showed up, what it meant? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one found you somewhere true, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.